What's up, you team of bad savages? You won't believe how the CIA is helping Ukraine win the war. I'm excited by the name already of this video. Let's check out, all we know that America helped Ukraine a lot. And don't forget to like, subscribe, click the bell for notification, and let's go.
The CIA is doing what? If you're a small country invaded by a larger, wealthier neighbor, how could you possibly defend yourself? Ukraine has faced this exact scenario, but thanks to an unprecedented intelligence revolution, they've managed to turn the tides against Russia. But how did Ukraine pull off such an intelligence coup? The answer lies in the shadowy world of espionage, where the CIA and Western intelligence agencies have been secretly helping Ukraine stay a step ahead of Russian forces. With real-time insights and advanced technology, Ukrainians often know when and where their enemy will strike. This knowledge has not only saved countless lives, but also shattered Russia's best chances of winning the war.
Exactly, man. Like USA's technology helped Ukraine a lot, saved a lot of lives also.
How did this partnership come about, and what has been its impact on the battlefield? Stick around to uncover the hidden story of how the CIA is helping Ukraine win the war. Let's dive into the origins of this extraordinary alliance. Since before the invasion, the Ukrainians have had access to excellent and detailed intelligence about their enemy. While it would have been hard to miss the military buildup along Ukraine's borders in 2021, the United States had increasingly specific knowledge that an invasion was coming. For example, Russia's Zapad exercise in September 2021 was noticeably larger than the previous year's version. While this could have been the result of a loosening of pandemic mitigation measures, Washington's intelligence apparatus wasn't fooled. Putin's own manifesto about Ukraine 2 months earlier, the disposition and composition of the forces, cybernetic information, and other sources revealed that any movement of these troops built up along the border was unlikely to be a simple military exercise. Putin could not conceal it as a training mission. One result of the extensive intelligence the United States and its allies collected before the invasion was that the wider world mobilized with an unusually high degree of symphony. Within a matter of days, Russia was largely isolated from most of the world's advanced economies, while Ukraine was getting a continual flow of the military and economic aid it would need to survive the conflict. The intelligence was even more specific than this, though. Arguably, Russia lost its best chance to win the war when its attack on the Hostomel airport outside of Kyiv failed.
By the way, that was the biggest airplane in the world, and it got destroyed over there in Ukraine.
Russia's original plan was to create a so-called air corridor by having its supposedly elite paratrooper units capture strategic airports. Once that was done, it would fly in the tanks, artillery, and other heavy equipment it would need to take control of major population centers. Unfortunately for Putin, the American intelligence community caught on to the idea. The Ukrainians graciously received this information and prepared accordingly. Meanwhile, the Russians were unprepared for the level of resistance they would receive at the airport or anywhere else. Ukraine fended off the attack, and the invasion that was supposed to end in a few days turned into 2.5 years of war. Russia's inability to...
Yeah, I mean, I was shocked how Ukrainians were able to deflect the Gostomel's airport defense because, like, Russia pushed in hard, man. First days of war were terrible, and Ukraine somehow those people were able to fight back. That was incredible.
Establish its so-called air corridor resulted in the famous stalled columns outside of Kyiv. That was when Western leaders began to realize that Ukraine wouldn't fall in days as they had feared. In other words, the only intelligence failure the West had about Russia was to overestimate its strength. Once it became clear that this intelligence was in error, the West sprung into high gear, delivering more and more lethal aid to Ukraine, albeit not at the pace the Ukrainians wanted. The episode at Hostomel was, in a way, the culmination of an intelligence partnership between Washington and Kyiv that stretches back over the previous decade. In this regard, Ukraine benefited from the deep institutional experience the United States had built since the end of World War II. Much of Washington's current intelligence infrastructure was created for the specific purpose of monitoring and countering Russia. The CIA, which has had the most impact in Ukraine, was created in 1947 as a result of that year's National Security Act. The NSA was formed by President Truman in 1952. The Soviet Union was the impetus for both of these events. Unlike much of the world, America's intelligence community never sat and breathed easy after 1991. The end of the Soviet Union did not mean the end of its focus on Russia. This focus was so sharp that it arguably left the United States unprepared for the September 11th terrorist attack, the wider war on terror that followed, and the rise of China in the Indo-Pacific region. However, it was highly useful in monitoring Russia, which was still the greatest geopolitical threat to Europe, and when the opportunity opened for a meaningful intelligence partnership with Ukraine, the CIA and its peers took it. The partnership goes beyond sharing information. Personnel and infrastructure are part of it. Ukraine's intelligence network uses American equipment. Ivan Bakhanov, the former leader of Ukraine's domestic intelligence agency, the SBU, said outright that without the CIA, Ukraine would not have been able to resist the Russian invasion.
That's for sure, no doubt about that. I mean, I think USA is helping to all the NATO members, Baltic states, Finland, Poland, that are bordering with the with a potential enemy, and that this is a good news because it helps us to feel safe, here in our countries, because when this thing happened in Ukraine, everybody in Latvia, we were so shocked because we are so close to Russia, and who knows, maybe we are next. That's what we thought back then. Now we think we are next for sure, no doubt about that. So thanks to USA and their the CIA, I was trying my best. We are staying safe,
How did such a partnership begin? After all, there would be significant dangers in sharing intelligence with a country that was once part of the Soviet Union. The SBU is a direct descendant of the KGB, has the same organization, and even occupies the same building. Some of its officers were once KGB men. Some were even trained in post-Soviet Russia's FSB. The story of this intelligence revolution begins when Putin came to power at the end of 1999. At that time, the prospect of a renewed Russian threat to Europe started to become more real. Even as the West continued to invest a lot of diplomatic and economic resources to bring Russia in as a cooperative player in the post-Cold War order, the American intelligence community remained wary, not enjoying the so-called peace dividend. In 2005, Putin lamented that the end of the Soviet Union was the worst tragedy of the 20th century. 2 years later, he began to confirm a lot of the uneasiness of—
It depends for who. For us Latvians, it was like a celebration. We are finally free, man. Yay! But for people, of course, who were dependent for the system, the people who were born there and raised there, it was a catastrophe. But for the new generations, it was celebration for sure.
Of America's intelligence warriors. In Munich, he harshly criticized the United States and the post-Cold War international order. The attempt to create a world in which there was one master, one sovereign, he said, was pernicious. The following year, Putin invaded Georgia, reminding Washington's intelligence apparatus to keep itself sharp. Meanwhile, as Putin was trying to end Russia's strategic retreat, the people of Ukraine wanted to retreat from Russia with increasingly fervent intensity. In 1994, post-Soviet Ukraine agreed to give up what was then the world's third largest nuclear arsenal in exchange for guarantees to its sovereignty and the integrity of its then recognized borders. For the next—
It was lies. It was all lies.
20 years, Russia was fine with this agreement, as it kept Ukraine within its sphere of influence through a series of puppet rulers. However, when Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych rejected the chance to deepen Ukraine's ties with the European Union in favor of even more integration with Russia, his people revolted and sent him packing to the country he really seemed to love. Yanukovych didn't go alone, though. Many of the Kremlin's most loyal assets, including top intelligence officials, went with him. The new Ukrainian regime was decidedly anti-Russia in strategic outlook and refused to toe the Kremlin's line any further. Russia's cronies sabotaged Ukraine's intelligence capacity on their way out. Documents were burned and all the computers were infected with malware. However, this proved to be a blessing in disguise. The new government's man in charge was Valentin Nalvachenko. Western intelligence agencies knew about him. He was an intelligence veteran that had reached out to his Western counterparts before, but political developments from the 1990s onward prevented the creation of a good intelligence relationship. Navlichenko understood that he needed to start the SBU over from scratch, and he wanted the CIA's help to do this. However, he had a problem on his hands. The CIA may have been cool with Navlichenko, but the agency was not cool with the SBU. It was so infiltrated by Russian spies that the CIA viewed it as a branch of Russia's FSB.
Man.
Case in point, when then CIA Director John Brennan came on a supposedly secret visit shortly afterward, Russian social media trolls mocked him and telegraphed his trip to the world. The top spooks may have fled with the former leader, but the SBU was still heavily infiltrated. But Washington wasn't keen.
For sure, all these years of recruiting spies and loyal people for Russia, they just don't go away in one day. It's not possible. They are so deeply rooted into the system that it takes time and effort to take them out.
In Ukraine, but not information that could be used in a military setting. The Obama administration did not want to do the latter. It still believed it could repair relations with Russia, and it did not want to risk new security problems for a militarily unprepared Europe while it attempted its pivot to Asia strategy in the wake of a rapidly emerging and much more formidable Chinese threat. Navichenko was disappointed with this, but did all he could to help the relationship blossom. Looking back on events in an interview 10 years later, he said that within a week, 90% of the remaining top leadership in the SBU was fired. Navlichenko understood that rooting out the Russian assets in the SBU was the first thing he needed to do to demonstrate to Washington that Ukraine was now serious about breaking away from Russia's orbit. Fortunately for him, American intelligence had deeply infiltrated Russia's spy networks. It had experience doing so for the better part of a century after all. The two cooperated and began removing Russian spies. Navlichenko offered another attraction to build trust with his Western counterparts. Prior to 2014, agencies like the CIA and Britain's MI6 only had a small presence in Ukraine, partially as a way to mollify Russia. This limited their potential in the country. In return for help in rooting out Russian spies, Navlichenko offered to expand their capacity in the country by having the CIA train Ukraine's new counterintelligence force. The new SBU leader also forced a generational shift. He knew that he couldn't staff his new unit with people from the old organization because of how heavily infiltrated it had been. Instead, he formed a new group called the 5th Directorate. It was staffed exclusively by people that were born after or shortly before the Soviet Union's collapse and had known nothing but an independent Ukraine. The new posture of the SBU quickly proved itself as Navlichenko deployed his agents to root out Russian spies throughout Ukraine. Kherson was a particular hotspot. There and elsewhere, Ukraine's new counterintelligence teams began capturing Russian assets at a high rate. They were successful in infiltrating separatist areas too. The Ukrainians transmitted this information to Washington in a steady stream from the beginning. They also tipped the UN off to many of the crimes that Russia was committing on Ukrainian soil. Ukraine made the most of all of this in the wake of a tragedy. Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 was shot.
Bro, that was big one, man. When they shot down the plane? Come on, man. Like how, what kind of there was like mistakes like that before in the history of human when the planes that were carrying civilians got shot down, but in the same time, man, this happened basically like 5-7 years ago, something like that, and this is mad. I mean, this day and time to make this kind of mistake, I mean, there's something wrong with the people.
Down in separatist-controlled airspace in eastern Ukraine. Both sides blamed the other for the incident, but unfortunately for the Russians and their separatist allies, the new SBU would prove itself here. The 5th Directorate intercepted a call involving Igor Bezler, a separatist leader. The call tipped him off about a bird flying toward him only 2 minutes before Flight 17 was hit. 20 minutes later, Bezler called a Russian intelligence official and said that a plane had been shot down. The rebels even confirmed that this conversation took place, but that it supposedly referred to a Ukrainian aircraft. The timing was a little too convenient though. The 5th Directorate also developed human source.
How does nobody got punished for that? I don't understand that. I mean, it's literally, did Malaysia even speak out about that? Did they reach out to get the people who were guilty for that? Or nobody took the guilt on them? They said no, it was Ukrainians, and Ukrainians said no, it was the rebels.
Sources behind the lines, and these sources helped to confirm the presence of the Buk surface-to-air missile system that was responsible for shooting the airliner down, despite the separatist forces denying possession of them. Already impressed by Ukraine's ability to root out Russian spies, the episode involving Flight 17 proved to be an important tipping point for the burgeoning relationship the CIA had with its Ukrainian counterpart. The quality of the intelligence about the airliner and the speed it was gathered convinced Obama and Brennan to increase the level of cooperation. The president did not yet clear the CIA to provide intelligence that could be militarized, but he did allow it to provide the training and equipment the Ukrainians would need to gather such intelligence on their own. Ukraine subsequently received specialized equipment, complete with CIA agents that would train their Ukrainian counterparts in using it. Some elite members of the 5th Directorate and other branches in the SBU were selected to receive intelligence training in the United States. This group of American-trained intelligence operators will become Ukraine's Unit 2245. Kirilo Budanov, Ukraine's current military intelligence leader, was among them. The partnership...
I mean, USA played such a big role of developing the new Ukraine's might. Army, intelligence, everything, you know. Hopefully they get rid of the corruption also, because the corruption was terrible before in Ukraine. I don't know how they fight there.
Extended to other branches of Ukraine's security services from this point onward too. The HUR is Ukraine's military intelligence branch. It was slower to build a relationship with American intelligence agencies because of Russian infiltration and incompetence. However, upon seeing the SBU's success, General Valery Kondratyuk took similar measures when he became the HUR's leader in 2015. He steadily began to root out Russian assets, and using the HUR's ability to conduct foreign intelligence operations to his advantage, sent trusted agents to get information about the Russian military on Russian soil. This move was designed entirely to curry favor with the West. The general personally visited Washington and shared detailed plans about the Russian Navy, including the Kremlin's nuclear submarines. Once analysts confirmed these documents were authentic, the American intelligence community naturally began to change its opinion of Ukraine's HUR. In 2016, the CIA agreed to help modernize the HUR through training and equipment, but it demanded that the Ukrainians continued to get rid of anyone with Russian sympathies in their ranks. This phase was called Operation Goldfish. It went beyond purges though. With the new equipment Ukraine's intelligence apparatus was getting, its capabilities greatly increased. Russian communications were increasingly now in the hands of Ukraine, thanks to the gear Washington provided. However, the training went far beyond that. Human intelligence was not ignored. Ukrainian agents were trained to assume fake Russian personas and gather secrets that way too. To support this effort, 12 hidden forward operating bases were built near the Russian border. Surprisingly, or maybe not, the Russians were largely in the dark about how robust the intelligence partnership between the two countries had become. The CIA continued to train new agents and spread them throughout Ukraine. They were ready for activation in case of wider Russian operations. However, the United States continued to refuse to share certain intelligence, like satellite imagery about events in Russia itself. Washington was adamant that no operations be carried out on Russian territory. Despite the worsening in relations, there were, even now, still hopes that Russia could be mollified, as countering the rising threat of China in the Indo-Pacific region remained the United States' top priority. Ukraine rankled at this prohibition, as it wanted to translate this new capability into greater lethality. The United States still largely opposed this, which led to tensions. For example, Ukraine discovered intelligence that Russia would deploy attack helicopters to Crimea. Kondratyuk sent a team of agents disguised as Russians, led by Budanov, to plant explosives, without informing Washington. The effort was unsuccessful, as a clash occurred with Russian commandos, who were tipped off thanks to a security breach in the HUR. The team led by Budanov suffered casualties and wound up having to swim back to friendly territory. It was an extraordinary feat, but nevertheless, the botched operation cost Kondratyuk his job. The fallout in Washington from the failed Crimean raid was extensive, and it further demonstrated Ukraine's security problems, as a call from Vice President Biden to Ukraine's President Petro Poroshenko was intercepted and leaked on the internet. This leak added to the fallout and resulted in many American national security officials calling for the CIA's partnership with Ukraine to end. However, the partnership ultimately proved too valuable to shut down. The Ukrainian efforts were pouring intelligence on Russia into the CIA headquarters at Langley, Virginia, aiding America's already significant penetration of its old Cold War enemy. By the end of the Obama administration, the partnership had produced such results that Russian equipment like drones was routinely winding up in the CIA's hands. These drones were promptly reverse-engineered and their encryption broken.
Man, CIA is like step ahead always, man. This is amazing. I mean, they were gathering information, they were preparing for the big conflict. They were like getting ready for war. There's this good saying, if you want peace, get ready for war, man. And it looks like USA is always a step ahead of their enemies. They're always looking, man. That's nice. You know, I would say they are the how to say saviors of the democracy or something like that. They bit wrong, but that's what I mean. Like they are protecting them democracy in the world, you know.
Meanwhile, on the day after the failed Crimean raid, there was an explosion in the separatist part of Donetsk Oblast, which killed a local commander, Arsen Pavlov. It was a demonstration of Ukraine's ability to combine intelligence and lethality, despite America's hesitation about it. The incoming Trump administration added a new threat to the partnership. However, influential administration officials like CIA Director and later Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and National Security Advisor John Bolton convinced him to maintain and expand the program, building more bases in Ukraine. The efforts bore fruit quickly, as a joint effort between the CIA and the HUR led to a Russian intelligence officer giving up data which confirmed the Kremlin's links to the Fancy Bear hacking group, which had, among other things, a penchant for hacking into the campaigns of Western political parties and candidates to create electoral chaos.
Wow,
By
yeah,
2021, when Russia was building up...
I heard about that before the Trump, Hillary Clinton elections, president elections. There was this special created troll fabric where a lot of Russian hackers were just trying to change opinion about Hillary Clinton in the people's minds, like posting crazy stuff on Twitter, and other stuff. That was wild.
Up its forces for an invasion, the level of penetration of the Kremlin security was so extensive that Western and Ukrainian intelligence officials knew an invasion was in the works, when even the generals of the Russian units building up on the border had no idea. The intelligence partnership even obtained the plan to kill or capture President Zelensky, as well as a list of high-level Russian sympathizers Putin and his officials believed would be acceptable replacements for the Ukrainian leaders they intended to overthrow. As a result, Ukraine quickly rounded up potential sources of disunity within its own ranks. When the invasion came, all American restraints on providing actionable military intelligence to defeat Russia were lifted. Russian convoys were exposed and pointed out to Ukrainian ambushers. High-value targets were identified, sent to Ukrainian HIMARS teams, and eliminated. Poor Russian signal security greatly assisted the American and Ukrainian intelligence partnership in this work. Meanwhile, the agents that the CIA had trained throughout the country in the years prior swung into action. These agents became the core of the Ukrainian insurgency in the Russian-occupied zones, and the fact that such an insurgency exists is the result of a massive Russian intelligence failure before the war. In contrast to the increasingly accurate assessment of the area that the CIA and its Ukrainian allies were getting, Russia's intelligence apparatus was so incompetent that it ignored its own polling data, suggesting that large portions of Ukraine's population were willing to go to war to resist a Russian military incursion. As a result of the FSB's failures, Putin further believed his own hype. The idea that the population would greet Russian soldiers as liberators and throw flowers at their feet originated with the FSB. Incompetence played a large part, but the FSB's pre-war failure was also another example of the success of the partnership the Ukrainians struck with the American intelligence community a decade earlier. As a result of that partnership, much of the Russian infiltration of Ukrainian society was rooted out. They might not have known it, but the FSB and its partners operated increasingly in the dark, and perhaps arrogant about their previous success, overestimated their capabilities. This would describe Russia's attitude about Ukraine as a whole too. If Russia had launched its full-scale invasion 10 years ago, the story in Ukraine might have turned out very differently.
That's for
However,
sure.
the intelligence
No doubt
Ukraine
about
now
that.
has access to, and the force of veteran operatives it built up from
Russia gave time to build up army to prepare for war. That's no doubt about that.
2014 onward, has kept it in the fight against its larger and wealthier neighbour 2.5 years on, and unlike the seesaw of war, this is an advantage it has never lost. What do you think about the intelligence partnership between Ukraine and its Western allies? Don't forget to let us know.